Well, for this part of the show, we take a look back at stories that have been out of the news circuit, and this week is no different. This week we take a look back at the story of slain police constable Francis Rasuge. The story first made headlines in 2004 when Constable Rasuge went missing after being picked up by her then boyfriend William NKuna at a hair salon in Temba, in Hammanskraal. Rasuge had left home on August 27th to do her hair at that salon, and her family said they became worried when she did not return that evening and did not show up for work the next day. A few days later, her hairdresser told police that the last person to be seen with Rasuge was her then boyfriend William NKuna. NKuna denied having anything to do with her disappearance. Despite the missing body, NKuna was nailed by other evidence and found guilty of murder. 8 years after his sentencing, Rasuge's body was found buried in NKuna's home, which at the time had been sold. After the property was sold, contractors dug a deep hole in the garden. That was when police officers' remains were found. NKuna has maintained his innocence to this day and denied the body found in his property was that of Rasuge. He also detailed how he would be writing a tell-all book. Well, former journalist Macintosh Polela is the reporter on NKuna's story, and who also, was keen to write a book about him at the time. He now joins us on the line. Macintosh, I just thank you for your time. Firstly, I just want you just to take us back, even before you met him as a reporter. This was one of those stories that was gripping headlines, that was week in, week out. The search for this particular police constable was, going on, and police were appealing to anybody for information. Take us back to those times when you were reporting on the story.
But look, I didn't actually report on the story, but on the night that, the story was reported, I actually took interest in the story of William NKuna and Constable Rasuge. And it so happened that many years later, when I had written a book, I all of a sudden received a call from William NKuna telling me that he had lost contact with his soul and that he would like for me to visit him in prison and bring him a copy of my book, My Father, My Monster, which he said to me he hoped was going to get him back in contact with his soul. I was intrigued by this, and so I took his request and I went to prison to meet him. And when I went to prison, I expected to meet a monster, only to meet somebody rather a very, very ordinary person.
And how would you describe him at the time? I know you say that you were expecting a monster, but how would you describe his demeanor?
Look, what intrigued me about him was that, he was very, very clean. I mean, he made sure that he looked very presentable, even though he was in prison uniform. But I was intrigued by the fact that he was constantly chewing when we were talking, and he subsequently apologized for his chewing, and he claimed that during interrogation he was wounded and his jaw was permanently injured, and to prevent it locking, he has to constantly chew. But he was a very, very presentable. He's a very presentable and a very intelligent man, and very manipulative at that.
What was his state of mind when you were talking to him?
He was still in denial. That was just before the remains were found. He was still in denial. He was very belligerent. He was telling me about the numbers of people that came to request for him to say where the body was. He mentioned the Women's League, and he mentioned other groups, and he said, these are his words, that they can blow vuvuzelas, until they get tired. He will never say where the body was, where the remains were, because he had nothing to do with it. And of course, I suspected that he was lying, and I looked him in the eye, and I asked him to tell me, did you kill her? And he simply said no.
And Macintosh, has anything come out of that, encounter since the time you went to go see him? Did anything happen post that? Have you seen him?
We've subsequently continued to talk. He would ask me for other books. I think I visited him twice or three times, and I had told him that I'm a writer. I would be interested in his full confession, and that when he was ready to confess, he must come and tell me, and that if he was not ready to confess, the deal was going to be off. And of course, I realized that he was not ready to confess. And, I subsequently distanced myself from him because it was going to be continuously, asking me to bring him stuff, and it was going to be a waste of time for me.
And for you, sitting there with him and listening to him, and just you say that he was in a consistent state of denial that, he didn't do this and all of that. Did he ever come out to you to tell you exactly? Because, yes, you say that he said he wanted to connect with his soul through your book. But did he ever tell you why exactly he was so keen to have you visit him all this time, apart from, all the things you were bringing for him?
Look, he was keen to talk. That's what I found about him. Mm-hmm. He was keen to tell his story, but the problem with his story is that, as we subsequently know, it was a lie. And I think he was delusional. He thought that nobody would ever find the remains of William NKuna. He just wanted to talk to me, to talk about his side of the story, and I sat and I listened to him, and for a while I entertained him because I thought that eventually he was going to open up, but he never did.
Tell you about, his relationship with Francis?
His relationship with?
With Francis, with Francis Rasuge. Did he ever tell you about their relationship?
He never wanted to talk about, their relationship. He wanted more to talk about, his relationship with one of his daughters, which he said he was very close, which intrigued me because here was a family that was looking for the remains of their daughter, because we all knew that she was dead. But he had his own daughter, which he was fixated with, and he never thought for a second to, say where the remains were. Because I said to him, do a confession, and, the end of that confession should be you telling me where the remains are, and you taking the police to point out where the remains are. But, he was never interested in that. He was more interested in talking about his own family.
And McIntosh, how easy was it for you when you were going to see him? Was there anything else that, some of the correctional services officers would say to you, or anything else? Like, maybe did you ever experience any hostility while going to visit him from other people?
Not at all, not at all. It was just, an ordinary visit like any other prisoner. And I think that, they were treating him just as everybody else.
Okay, no, thank you so much, McIntosh, for talking to us there. That is McIntosh Polela, someone who was very keen to write a book on William NKuna, rather, and that is a case that had been made popular, by the disappearance of Francis Rasuge, a police constable there from Temba, whose disappearance really gripped the nation. And when those remains were found years later, it still, became a sore point for the family, because that killer who, was found to have done this had not even confessed to the murder and was still insistent that those are not the remains of his then girlfriend.